So, I've been having a really hard time sorting out my thoughts trying to explain this, and I think one of the reasons why I've been struggling with it is because I've been trying to explain about 3 decades worth of falsified studies and falsified images and testing around Alzheimer's. And I'm trying to compare that to I'm trying to take that as sort of like the background of what I had, like where I started to learn and to study about energy limiting diseases. So, there was an article that I read about this like 2 years ago, but basically, Alzheimer's is not exactly what we've been told for years. The reason why I fell into this is because I found out it's sort of like it seemed to function along the same way that long COVID does. These diseases have a lot in common, but basically, long COVID is an energy limiting disease. It's an immune disease, it's a vascular disease. Your immune system gets damaged. A lot of weird shit happens to your veins, a lot of weird shit happens to your brain. Sometimes your body will just like fall into certain patterns of decay and damage from the environment, from the virus, and it'll just start to replicate those patterns, which is what I was talking about in the last video when I was talking about the winter storm and how I started losing bone. The building froze. We ended up surrounded by about 12 or 15 feet of snow. I went without food for a really long time. And even though I ended up getting food after a couple of days, the pattern of damage, which was not having food, kind of got like set in my brain. And for whatever reason, my brain decided, let's replicate that pattern, okay? And it is kind of hard to understand, but that actually is an energy limiting disease. So there are two forms of metabolism in your body. There's the one in your tummy, where nutrients get broken down, and then there's one in your brain. And this is what I found out about Alzheimer's. We were told that Alzheimer's was caused by amyloid deposits. You have to treat that and all this other stuff. Turns out that that's actually a massive lie. The truth is that Alzheimer's is a disease of energy in your brain not properly being broken down and sent throughout the rest of the body. Okay? The metabolism in your brain stops working correctly. That's the easiest way to understand Alzheimer's. Long COVID is a tiny bit more complicated, and I can explain it so much better than Alzheimer's because I've studied it longer. But once I had noticed these two things that were in common, I began thinking a lot more about energy limiting diseases, especially like ME and CFS, okay? Because they're all energy limiting diseases. There's something wrong. Well, not wrong. I actually don't think that it's wrong. I think what it is that our bodies fall into really could be sometimes are beneficial patterns of replicating what is happening in the environment around us. And I've been having such a hard time explaining this. But I believe what my disease is, the reason why I went without food, and then after I had food, my body just couldn't properly like break the nutrients down in my tummy. I think that my body has learned, well, we're in a toxic environment, and so you have to learn how to function with toxicity. We're in a toxic environment, so you have to just sort of replicate patterns of what's going on around you. And so a lot of people don't understand what's wrong with me or like why I get sick so easily, but it's basically that my body replicates damage very easily. The flip side of this that I've noticed throughout my entire life, because I've always been a thin person up until a couple of years ago, is that my metabolism is super, super fast. It's so high. Like, it's really hard for me to be like very physically active when I'm poor. Um, because I have to eat so much food for me to be physically active. And I've always noticed that. So that's sort of like my background. But then when we get into disability, like I was probably always disabled, but once I became severely disabled, I began to notice that the flip side of having a super high metabolism is that when things would go wrong in my environment or I would get sick, like things could spiral very, very quickly out of control. But it didn't always affect my food metabolism. What it did seem to affect was my energy levels. So about a decade ago, I basically had some form of fibro, which I believe was some form of CFS. And I think that that's the thing that ties all these things together. So I was focusing a lot on trying to explain these 3 decades of falsified Alzheimer's studies that have led to like $150 billion from like super high-end Ivy League institutions being devoted to like all these scientists who have replicated a bunch of bullshit. And it's so fucked up. Like, if you actually read the articles on it, it's really overwhelming, and it's so complicated how much information that they falsified that it's very, very difficult to understand. So I think my problem was that I was trying to explain something that should never have happened, but I probably should have focused a little bit more on what these diseases probably are. What I'm starting to think, and what I'm beginning to better understand, is I believe these diseases, these energy limiting diseases, are some sort of replication of a toxic environment. That is really what I believe that it is. With long COVID, we know, this is so awesome, we know that the cause is the coronavirus, okay? The coronavirus causes clots, it damages your immune system, it's a vascular disease. It's honestly kind of easy to understand, especially because it has so many similarities with AIDS and HIV, with the immune system issue. So that's like really, really easy to break down. But when we start getting into like Alzheimer's, when we get into ME/CFS, when we get into ADHD, it gets a little bit more complicated, especially because I don't have those diseases like all the way that I do long COVID. And I've engaged in like almost 5 years now of like super, super in-depth study towards long COVID. And there was a pandemic, so I'm following like a lot of researchers, whereas like ME is really poorly studied. Alzheimer's has 3 fucking decades of bullshit, and billions and billions and billions of dollars towards drugs to like break down the deposits, and it's very possible that those drugs didn't do shit. So I've been trying to explain this, and it's actually like extremely heartbreaking. So this is why I switched to my computer, because I was like, this is going to be a long video. I'm glad that I began with the other video and the other article by focusing primarily on treatment. You want to focus primarily on how do you fix the metabolism in your brain? How do you fix the energy breakdown in your brain? And there are like really simple things for that. There's like tons of brain herbs you can take. I do believe that the way that would probably work is that I think you need to take the supplements like NAC and NR, and then I think you probably need to find like 1 or 2 plants to supplement that, depending on like your comorbidities and like what you can actually take. And I think that that's probably the best way to work on the energy limitation in your brain, and then to also get the mechanical aspect of what plants do. But I don't have the other 3 diseases, and unfortunately, they're also not as well studied as COVID, because COVID was a pandemic. So you had like worldwide, you had this massive worldwide response, whereas like we've never really had a massive worldwide response to ADHD. One of my siblings has ADHD, and my mom took that sibling to England because his disease was like so. It was like really, really hard for him to function, and it had a severe impact on his life. So she took him to England to basically to have him analyzed and to work with these like world-class physicians and to get proper treatment, and it was amazing. And it was a really, really wonderful thing. But she actually really fucking hated it, and she didn't really like having disabled kids, and she spent like the next few years like nonstop talking about like how much it took from her. And and I had to teach my brother like why Johnny can't read for like years on end, which is why I'm pretty good at explaining complicated concepts. It's because it was forced on me from childhood. But yeah, I think my problem when I started this, and as I've been trying to explain it for the last few years, is that I've focused so much on the falsified information versus beginning with what I actually understand, and focusing primarily on that. But I do think that that would probably be the way to begin studying these diseases. The big part of why I keep like trying to get at this, it's not just because I have long COVID and I think that there are similarities across the board, although that is a big part of it. It's actually because based on what we know with COVID and long COVID, it's that the disease has not gone anywhere. We're still in a pandemic. We've just had a lot more disabled people die. But another really, really important thing that I keep hammering away at people is that eventually what I have will become very, very common. This breakdown in like the way that your brain synthesizes energy and not being able to tell your immune system how to function properly, eventually that will be very, very common, and I think that that will actually be an incredibly heartbreaking I think that that's going to be very, very heartbreaking when people begin to understand exactly what it is that happens to me when I breathe unfiltered air. When this becomes a very common thing, because whenever I do these videos, the sound in the background is always an air purifier. If I don't run those, I get these weird headaches. I get like weird pain in my brain. And that's why I have to wear special respiratory protection. It's why I have to wear like the glasses that protect my eyes. It's because my eyes are so damaged and my immune system is so damaged that my body doesn't protect itself any longer. And as difficult as that is for me, I think that as we move further into a world where this type of disease, which is so unique and so weird, and it's very hard for me to explain to people what's wrong with me, I think that I will be very, very devastated to find that this is becoming more common, and people also don't know how to treat it, or also don't know how to analyze incorrect information that just gets parroted and parroted and parroted, and people don't care that they're taking medicines that don't help them, or that we've enrolled people in studies that might actually be killing them. So that's why I wanted to do this a little bit more in depth and break it up sort of like as a series, because I do want people to sort of like put a little bit more thought into what the ramifications of the COVID pandemic actually might be, and what the human future might look like.